Welcome to Truth for Our Time with your host, Tamara Scott.
And welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is Truth for Our Time, where we help you live God's Word in today's world. We help you when the headlines hit home. And here's why. We discuss everything on this show, whether it's decorating for the holidays, preparing our hearts as well as our homes, or something as hard-hitting as politics, education, economics, taxation, evolution, whatever it is. Because if God expects you to live through it, He has directed you how to do it in His Word. And so we help you find that instruction somehow in the topics, the viewpoint in the topics that we deal with today. I am in the Thanksgiving mode, was making the preparations to clean off that kitchen table right before I came here so we could start actually cleaning it, clearing it, getting ready for Thanksgiving tomorrow. I'm sure all of you have plans as well. Some of you will be traveling on the day. Some of you may have already had your big day last weekend, or you may be having it the upcoming weekend. And some of you may not be hearing the show until Sunday at noon on the Truth Network 99.3 FM. Either way, I hope your hearts have been prepared for Thanksgiving. As you know, last week's show, we asked you to join us in Concerned Women for America's National Day of Fasting, Repentance, and Prayer. It was, I think, was it 7 or 8 years we've done that now. People in other countries join us across the globe because they understand if America falls, the globe falls. The world suffers. The world is in danger. And so we just ask everybody to put aside the partisan prayers that we found, even in a non-election year, but there are still smaller elections. We ask them to start asking for healing for our nation, repentance individually and corporately as far as church bodies and as a government and in our business industry. We ask them to prepare their hearts for a season of graciousness and gratefulness before are we switching mics out here? For those of you who are watching online, you're seeing it. For those of you who are listening on the radio, we're changing some things here in the studio. Forgive us for that. Anyway, we're asking you to prepare your homes and your hearts for the season of gratefulness before we get into that season that the consumer industry would have us be as greediness. We ask you to prepare your hearts for Advent. And of course, before we feast tomorrow, a week ago on Thursday, we ask you to fast and consider just spending time before the Lord and reflecting on what your role is and what His role is for you. And so I hope you were able to join us in that. If not, you can always take a day out and pray and fast. It's always welcome before the Lord. Now, I have to also clarify, joining us is going to be Bill Federer, and we're so pleased to have Bill, and I want to get to him right away because if you've ever heard him speak, he's with the American Minute. If you've ever heard him speak, you know it's turn on the hearing aids to high speed because his words are just powerful and so much information to give. And so I want to get right to him. We're going to be talking about Thanksgiving, about the Mayflower Compact, and about Islam and how they're all tied together. Does that make you curious? It makes me a little curious. And when I told him those are the topics I wanted to speak about, because he's an expert on Islam, I couldn't just let it go with what happened in Paris just a week ago. And he said, no problem. And I thought, how interesting is that? So we'll be joining him ever so shortly, and I want to hear his views on this next point I'm going to bring up. So before I get to that, let me thank my sponsors. Christians for America, Crave, Christians Reviving American Values Every Day, Crave, ChristiansForAmerica.com. We thank the Swarthouts for partnering with us, giving us the ability to be on air, to give information to you for 2 years now. We thank them for just standing with us and helping us get information that Americans have used across this nation. We also thank Webcast One Studios, where we actually come from and produce the show, webcastonelive.com. You can listen at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays if you're hearing this in the car on Sunday, and you have the ability to listen at work while you're working at the desk, or maybe out in the field, or maybe you're at home. You can join us at webcastonelive.com. Live at 10 a.m. Wednesdays. We have people across the country, across the globe who tune in. Or you can join us at 99.3 FM Sundays at noon, and we're very honored to be on that network as well, the Truth Network. How fitting that Truth for Our Time be on the Truth Network. So we thank the Lord for just being able to bring those organizations together and get news to you. So Bill Federer, as I said, is with the American Minute. He's an expert on Islam. He's an expert on American history. And if you ever get a chance to hear him speak, run. Don't walk, run. Make every effort you can, and you will be so impressed and so informed. He has a multitude of books that are available. He and his wife, she is also writing about our history. Bill, thank you for joining me.
Grace be with you, Tamara.
American Minute, is it .com?
Correct.
And people could sign up for that and get your little news alerts on our historic events that take place across this nation. That comes out how often?
Every day.
Does it come out every day? I must be signed up for the one that comes out maybe once a week or something.
Right. Well, I do have another one that I send out occasionally. So sort of there's two of them there, but they can sign up at the website, AmericanMinute.com.
Okay. And your wife, is it Susan?
Correct. Uh-huh.
And she has now written a book about America's miracles, and that is a great book. If you've got kids at home and you're thinking about Christmas, this is a great idea. It's an easy read, and it's a great way to teach kids the honesty, the truthful history of this nation before they head into the public schools and get the other side of a revised history. So it's an easy-to-read book. I have high school students that like to look through that book just because of the quickness in which you can read through it. So, Bill, I want to thank you for joining us. Day before Thanksgiving, Mayflower Compact, proclamations for Thanksgiving, and then with Islam and what took place just a week ago in Paris, the fact that 1 in 4 women in Europe are now likely to be raped or gang raped, and the fact that Belgium is now under threat of attack. And they're now telling us here in America during our holiday season that we should be on high alert. Tying it to Islam, I said to you, can we do it? And you said, no problem.
Right. Well, we can start off with the Muslims surrounding Vienna, Austria in 1529. 100,000 Muslims under Suleiman the Magnificent surrounded Vienna, Austria. Now, Suleiman the Magnificent controlled the Ottoman Muslim Empire, which controlled all of North Africa, Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia, Libya, all of Egypt, which people forget. Egypt used to be Christian for 6 centuries, evangelized by by Mark that wrote the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so that's older than America, right? 6 centuries of Christian history in Egypt, all conquered by the Muslims in one generation under Amir ibn al-As, beginning in 642 AD. There used to be 250 Catholic dioceses along North Africa. They were all conquered by the Umayyad Muslims in one generation. And of course, Spain had been conquered by the Muslims and held for 700 years until Ferdinand and Isabella completed the driving of them out. And then the Muslims conquered Jerusalem, which had been a Byzantine Christian city for centuries since Constantine, and they conquered it in 638 AD. And then the Muslims conquered Syria. Syria was the first country to completely be Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul. The name Christian was first used in Syria. There's more ancient Christian writing in the Syrian language of Syriac than any other languages other than Greek and Latin. And so these Syrian Christians evangelized east like the Greeks did west. So they evangelized into Persia, India, Mongolia, even China during the Tang dynasty in the 600s had a thriving Syrian Christian community. But it was largely wiped out by the Ming dynasty that wanted to get rid of foreign influence. And then there was a Muslim leader named Tamerlane that wiped out Christianity in Central Asia. He killed 17 million people, left pyramids of skulls. But then the Muslims invaded into what is today the Turkey, but back then it was the Byzantine Christian Empire. So all 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation were wiped out by the Muslims. The cities that New Testament letters are written to, Ephesus, Colossae, Galatia, those cities were wiped out by the Muslims. So the Greek Christians begged the West for help. The West sends help. It's called the Crusades. They go on for 2 centuries, and then the Muslims pick up where they left off. So the Muslims have 14 centuries of crusades. The West just have 2 centuries of crusades. And about an estimated 240 million people have been killed by the Muslim crusades. And then finally, they conquer Constantinople in the year 1453. When the Muslims conquer Constantinople, it ends the land trade routes to get from Europe to India and China. People forget Marco Polo in 1271 went from Venice, Italy to China, brought back spaghetti, coal, gunpowder. Talked about the Chinese inventing plates made out of porcelain called china because it came from China. Chinese invented thread from worms, silkworms. Chinese invented paper from tree pulp rather than from papyrus reeds along the Nile Delta in Egypt. And so this tree pulp, they printed paper. They printed paper currency. And so the first paper currency in the world was in China during Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty. That's why they call it the Yuan to this day, their currency. Chinese invented the compass, the wheelbarrow, the Pony Express. I mean, here, think of it. When Columbus discovered America, looking for a sea route to India and China, because the Muslims cut off the land routes to India and China. So in 1453, the Muslims conquered Constantinople, cutting off the land routes. And so the Portuguese say, hey, let's go around South Africa. They make it to India in 1498. The British, interestingly enough, they tried to get to China by going north of Russia. In 1553, they had their ships frozen in the ice and sort of gave up. But the Spanish got behind Columbus's plan, and in 1492, he set sail, and he was convinced he made it to India and China. So he names the people he meets the Indians. Think of it. We never would have called Native Americans Indians if it had not been for Islamic Jihad and the ISIS Islamic State called the Caliphate cutting off the land routes to India and China. Now, a little side note, Columbus comes to the New World. The New World had been prosperous because of abundant animals and food, and so it never developed any further than hunter-gatherers. And so you can read any book on world history, for example, Guns, Germs, and Steel, a famous Pulitzer Prize-winning book. It studies civilizations around the world and says the most basic human endeavor is hunting and gathering. That's the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak. After that, you have the domestication of crops and the domestication of animals. Well, most of the domesticable crops were in Mesopotamia. Wheat, rye, barley, oats, and the domesticable animals. Out of, I think, 14 animals that have been successfully domesticated, most of them were found in the middle, in the Fertile Crescent. The ox, the cow, the goat, the donkey, the chicken that was originally domesticated in China. But Mesopotamia had the two, so they were able to graduate from hunter-gatherer to farming. And when you farm, you can save up grain, so you don't have to spend all day hunting and gathering. And so when you save up grain, people can do other things with their lives, and they develop other careers, including science and literature and armies. Because now you can go on. So they began to conquer, and they began to conquer in increasingly larger areas and so forth. And but here they conquered and eventually, developed the gunpowder and all these different cannons and guns and everything. When Columbus came to the New World, the American Indians had not even developed a wheelbarrow. I mean, it was the bottom of the technological ladder. So in other words, somebody was going to conquer the Americas. And they tried to blame the Europeans, but China sent out a treasure fleet in the 1400s, and they almost discovered America. The Portuguese, they had settlements in India and so forth. They probably would have found it. The major global powers were, there was China, but they went into an isolationist mode after their treasure fleet period. But you had the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Dutch and the French and the English. So one of those was going to, sort of like Hawaii, when Hawaii was discovered, it was an islands in the middle of the Pacific. They were riding around in canoes, where the Europeans had these ships. I mean, here's the Spanish Armada. I mean, these are 3 and 4 stories with cannons on every level. And so somebody was going to conquer Hawaii.
Okay.
Got to conquer America. So I'm getting off track here.
No, you're doing great, and I want you to come right back to it. But we have a hard break, and I have to honor the break. But stay on it. We come back. I'm always impressed how quickly you can tie it together. We'll be right back with Bill Federer, Federer, AmericanMinute.com. Stay tuned right here at 99.3 FM. Truth for Our Time, webcast1live.com.
Credit cards are like grandkids. They love you, sometimes get out of control, and it's fun to get a new one. Who can stop them from piling on?
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of Des Moines. At the end of the day, you can return the grandkids, but you're stuck paying off bad credit card debt. We'll help you put the fun back into using credit cards responsibly. Right, kids?
Yeah!
If you need help getting credit cards off your back, call Consumer Credit of Des Moines.
Hi, my name is David Burrier, your Hope Coach. I host a live weekly talk show called I've Been There every Thursday afternoon at 5:30, right here on webcast1live.com, and on my weekly radio program Saturday mornings at 10 on Truth Network 99.3 FM. I interview common everyday people who have survived incredible life challenges and who testify to God's faithfulness in the midst of their storms. So join me as we bring a message of hope and encouragement. Everybody needs hope. I know, because I've been there.
Rockton Prevention is celebrating 25 years of creating a caring community. We want to say thank you to the tens of thousands of Rock High School mentors that have carried our message of health, love, and encouragement to over 1.5 million children, teachers, and parents. Our mentors teach children methods and skills to prevent bullying and drug use. Thank you to all the school administrators, teachers, and counselors for the opportunity to serve you. Rock on, fair citizens. Rock on. This is Pat McManus for Rockton Prevention, the Richard O. Jacobson Foundation, and this station.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Welcome back to Truth for Our Time with your host, Tamara Scott.
And thank you for joining us. I am Tamara Scott. You're listening to Truth for Our Time on 99.3 FM, the Truth Network, or Webcast One Live Studios. If you're joining us at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, we thank you for that. Bill Federer is an American writer of over 20 books, one of which was sold over 500,000 copies, America's God and Country Encyclopedia, which I myself have several copies of. I've given them as gifts. It's a terrific book. I was quoting from that book before I ever knew who Bill Federer was. I love it when that happens. And then God lets me meet the author, and it's just so much fun to meet people who you have revered and respected and used their resources for years. So I appreciate that very much. He has a host of books. I'd invite you to go and look at those books. And Bill, is AmericanMinute.com the best place for for folks to find those books?
Yes, AmericanMinute.com. And Tamara, I can't live up to your introduction. I heard someone say a big shot's just a little shot away from home. So, but I'm honored to be on your program.
Well, we are thrilled to have you, and you're doing a great job of bringing us. Always, you weave through history and how Islam is not something new that we're dealing with. And when people want to talk about Islam's contributions to history, you share them But they're not the positive ones that some would have you believe. It's what has catapulted us out of defense, out of safety, out of necessity, into the great things that we, other civilizations, have done. Would that be a correct statement?
Right, yeah. Those that criticize Columbus and say he was such a terrible guy, they need to turn the page one back and realize that the reason Columbus set sail to find a sea route to India and China was because 40 years earlier, the Muslims conquered Constantinople, cutting off the land routes to India and China. And so there's two threads that I can trace through history. One is greed, the other is gospel. There's always people motivated by the gospel, and they're the ones that have orphanages and medical clinics and dig wells and villages. And you always have people motivated by greed, and they're the ones that take land from the Indians, sell people into slavery, and vote for candidates they think will help their pocketbook, even though that candidate stands for immorality. So those two threads exist today. And when we see these colonists coming to the New World, originally Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, French, and English, they're motivated by these two threads. And when the Spanish discovered the New World, there were greedy ones that decided to enslave the Native Americans. And there was a priest at the same time Martin Luther is leading the Reformation in Germany. This priest in America is named Bartolomé de las Casas. He spends his whole life trying to get the King of Spain to stop the enslavement of the Native Americans. So he's a good guy. And he finally is successful. They stop enslaving the Native Americans. But the greedy guys go, well, where can we get more slaves if we can't enslave the Native Americans? Someone said, Africa. And so they went to the Muslim slave ports, and they would buy Africans from the Muslims, because the Muslims went into North Africa and then into the rest of Africa, and they would capture entire tribes, and they would sell them throughout the Ottoman Empire for 8 centuries before America was ever discovered. But then they began to sell them to these greedy Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, who brought them to the New World. And so there's these two threads, and they still exist today. Now back to this progression. The Dark Ages started when the Muslims captured Egypt and held back the ships of papyrus. So there was a paper shortage in Europe. They wrote fewer books, and it's called the Dark Ages. The Renaissance started when the Muslims were invading Greece, and the Greek scholars were fleeing further west to Florence, Italy, bringing their Greek architecture and literature. And so there was this re-interest in the 1400s of Greek stuff because all the Greeks were fleeing. And so that is what we call the Renaissance. So Islam's responsible for the Dark Ages when they conquer Egypt, hold back the ships of papyrus. They're responsible for the Renaissance when they invade into Greece and the Greek scholars flee to. But the Greek scholars also fled with their Greek New Testaments. And so in the late 1400s, early 1500s, the scholars in Europe began to translate the Bible not just to Latin, but all the way back to Greek. Erasmus was a priest that translated the Bible, from the Greek, and he was friends with Martin Luther. And so this re-interest in the original language and original meaning of scriptures and wanting to put it in the language of the people, this laid the foundation for something we call the Reformation, started by Martin Luther in 1517. And then in 1529, 100,000 Muslims surround Vienna, Austria, under Suleiman the Magnificent. And so we see these, the Holy Roman Emperor is Charles V of Spain. So whereas Suleiman the Magnificent is the most powerful leader in the East, he is a Muslim, the most powerful leader in the West is Charles V of Spain. He's a Catholic. He controls Spain, the Spanish Netherlands, Austria, countries, Italy, captures the Pope, imprisons him for 6 months. I mean, Charles V was a pretty tough guy. He controls all the New World, and the Philippines are named after his son, King Philip of Spain, and then by marriage, he controls the Portuguese areas of Brazil and South Africa and parts of India. And so these are the two superpowers, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, East, Charles V, Catholic, West. And so Charles V decides the Muslim invasion is so serious, he's pressured to make a treaty with the Protestants. It's called the Peace of Augsburg of 1555. It's the first treaty to recognize Protestants. And there's a little Latin phrase in this treaty that had huge repercussions. What was the phrase? Cuius regio, eius religio, which means whose is the reign, his is the religion. In other words, look, Protestant king, believe whatever you want in your kingdom. Let's just work together against these Muslims who are invading Europe because they want to kill us all. And so they're able to stem the Muslim invasion, but it started an unanticipated domino effect where over the next century, different kings decided to believe slightly different things. And so northern Germany and Sweden was Lutheran, Switzerland Calvinist, Scotland Presbyterian, England was Anglican, Holland was Dutch Reformed. And if you didn't believe the way your particular king did, you were persecuted and you fled. And so there was this mass migration of people shifting around Europe in the 1600s simply for conscience sake. And those were the ones that spilled over and founded colonies in America. And so we see that it was one Christian denomination per country in Europe. Prior to the Muslim invasion, it was Catholic. But the Muslim invasion was so serious and the Reformation had just started, that's what pressured Charles V of Spain to do this Treaty of Augsburg of 1555. Now, Spain, they took the gold from the New World, right, that they were getting from the Potosi mines there in Peru. They were taking all that wealth and they were using it to fight Islam, holding back the Muslims from conquering Europe. But after several famous battles, the Battle of Malta in 1565 on September 11th, the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, the Spanish decides to take its powerful fleet called the Armada and stop the Reformation going on. They send their armies into Holland, Antwerp, Holland, called the Spanish Days of Fury, Spanish Furies, and they, pillage and rape and so forth. But they're sending their Armada to stop the Reformation in England. And the Dutch and the English team up, and a hurricane hits, and the Spanish Armada is sunk in 1588. Why is this significant? Because Spain had held a monopoly on the New World. And the French tried to settle Florida in 1565, a bunch of French Protestants called Huguenots. Spain found out about it and butchered all the men and took the women and children away. So the rest of Europe said, we can't touch the New World. Spain's too powerful. But after the sinking of their Spanish Armada in 1588, it was like an Oklahoma land rush. All the other countries of Europe said, hey, let's rush over, stake our claim. So French settled New France. The Dutch settled New Amsterdam. The Swedes settled New Sweden, which was later taken over by the Dutch and taken over by the British and called Delaware and New Jersey. Of course, New Amsterdam turned into New York. The Catholics, Lord Baltimore of Ireland, was given permission to settle Maryland as a Catholic colony. William Penn settled Pennsylvania. It was a Quaker colony. Connecticut, New Hampshire were Congregationalist colonies. And the situation in America was one Christian denomination per colony. And their attitude was, if you don't like our denomination, fine, start your own colony. Now, there was some tolerance developed, but it was a new thing. And most important is Pennsylvania. William Penn had been imprisoned in the Tower of London for 8 months, comes to the New World, and is given Pennsylvania by Charles II, and he decides to do a holy experiment. What was the holy experiment in Pennsylvania? To see if different Christians of different denominations can live together in the same geographic area. Wow, what a novel idea.
We were testing it back then, and sometimes I'm not so sure now, so that's kind of interesting.
But it was in Pennsylvania that the Continental Congress met. All the other colonies felt comfortable going there. The Declaration was written there. The Constitution was written there. In other words, God was showing his blessing on Christians working together. And their attitude was, look, we may not agree on religion all the time, but you were willing to fight and die for my freedom. I need to let you practice your faith. So these different states, colonies worked together against the King of England because they wanted to take away all their rights, similar to the Catholics and the Lutherans working together in Europe with the Treaty of Augsburg in 1555, saying, let's keep the Muslims out because they want to kill us all. And anyway, we're getting closer to the Pilgrims, and the Pilgrims were in England. Now, in England, they had a Catholic king named Henry VIII, and he was married to Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of the King of Spain. Pretty important daughter, right? The daughter of the King of Spain. Spain's the most powerful empire in the world. And after 18 years, Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of the King of Spain, she does not have a son. Only a daughter married, but not a son. Henry VIII wants a son, so he decides he's going to divorce her. The Pope would not recognize the divorce. Well, that's pretty understandable because Charles V, early in his career, had invaded Italy and his army had imprisoned the Pope for 6 months. So the Pope's not in any hurry to get on the bad side of Spain, so he does not recognize the divorce. And so Henry VIII says, well, I'm far enough away from Italy, and I'm just going to declare myself my own Pope. he starts the Church of England, puts himself on as the head, and he goes on to have 6 wives. Not at the same time, but their fates were divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. And so there was another group in England that said, you know what, we want to separate not just from the Church of England, but we want to purify, the Church of Rome, we want to purify this church in England. And Henry VIII had spread the English Bible around the country because his advisors suggested if he really wanted to go through with this break from Rome, he needed to stop using the Latin Bible, because as long as he's using a Latin Bible, they're going to look toward Italy, because that's where they speak Latin. And so that's when Henry VIII decided to spread the English Bible around the country, but something unexpected happened. People began to read it. They wanted to purify the Church of England. They were nicknamed the Puritan. The king didn't like Puritans. He would send spies into their churches to listen to their sermons, and if they departed from the Anglican liturgy, the pastor was arrested, sort of like in Houston, where the mayor is sending spies and to get all the sermons of all the pastors.
Exactly, yes.
Wanting to reestablish this totalitarian. And so there was another group that said it's beyond hope of trying to purify the Church of England. We're simply going to separate ourselves, and we're going to meet in secret barns and basements. They got arrested, put in stocks, and they would be having their land confiscated. And so finally these Pilgrim separatists decided to flee to Holland. Now, Holland, it had the 7 united Netherlands. These were 7 provinces that united together against Spain. And the provinces believed slightly different things, but they said, hey, we got this common enemy of Spain. We'll allow each province to have their own little give and take when it comes to religion. And so this tolerance allowed the Pilgrims to go there and keep their Pilgrim faith. They settled in Leiden, Holland. Now, who else was in Leiden? Well, interestingly enough, the King of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella. They drove the Muslims out of Spain who had been there 700 years, and then they decided, well, we're not sure if some Muslims are pretending to be Jews, so we're going to sort of do a inquisition to make sure there's not. And so, long and short of it, the king said the Jews have to convert or leave. And so a lot of them flee to Portugal, and then they flee to Holland, and they settled in Leiden.
Okay.
And there was a rabbi teaching.
Stay right there, folks. We'll be right back with more from Bill Federer and An American Minute after these messages.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner of Service Legends, and my position is Chief Talent Officer.
I'm Nicholas Wonderscheid.
I am Bernie Hobbs.
And I'm the Service Manager.
Marketing Director and Client Relations Manager.
Everything that we do is about ensuring that we exceed your expectations.
Our clients are important to us. 100% satisfaction.
We're not just focused on heating and cooling. That's the easiest part of our job, actually, is fixing furnaces and air conditioners.
Everyone that we come in touch with, we want to improve lives.
Bottom line is, we've got our installation guarantees, 25% energy savings guarantee, comfort guarantee, temperature selection guarantee, property protection guarantee.
100% satisfaction guaranteed. Fixed rate or it's free.
All of those guarantees are backed up with a 100% money-back guarantee to hold ourselves accountable to making sure that you get what you're after.
Just fixing the problem today. If they have another problem 5 days down the road, it's still fixed rate or it's free.
We use what's called straightforward pricing. Our technicians are going to give you an exact to-the-penny price on what it's going to take before they move forward with any repair. That way you know what to expect.
It's the same price every day.
No surprises.
If you get off work at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you come home, you realize that, oh, my furnace is broken. Now you need to call somebody out that night. You shouldn't have to pay more for that.
We're guaranteeing service 24/7.
We run afternoons, evenings, nights, weekends. We're staffed to work that.
Phone rings at 3 in the morning. You'll get one of our representatives answering the phone every time.
We're not sending you out to Timbuktu in some call center. It's our Service Legend team members, our mission control team.
I'll take a call anytime.
And then they answer the phones the same way during the day as they do at night.
It's a great day at your service company. How can we make you smile?
That's the only way to provide true 24-hour service.
When you're able to let somebody actually live in their home safely when they weren't able to do that before, where they don't have to stay up at night and worry about, is the heat going to come back on? Are we going to freeze the pipes? Is the baby in the room next door going to be sick because they got too cold? When you're able to help somebody overcome challenges like that, that's impacting a life. That makes a difference. I get goosebumps thinking about it.
I love the team. I love the people that I work with.
We have fun, but we work hard.
I call them my ambassadors of legendary service. If you could just envision what that is, that's who we're sending to your home.
They literally will call in, pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I want to talk to your manager. And I get on the phone, they're like, that technician that was at my house was the greatest technician ever. That's cool to me.
We want to brighten people's days.
Every person that we have going into the house has gone through an extensive background check.
Drug testing, we have a very thorough interview process that 1 out of 140 people make it through.
If we promise you something, that's what you're going to get, no matter what.
We're here when you need us to protect the safety and comfort of your family.
If you're not happy, we're going to make it right.
If we're willing to put 100% money back guarantee on what we do, what type of work do you think we do?
Give us a call. We're there for you 24/7, 365 days a year.
Enough said.
Welcome back to Truth for Our Time with your host, Tamara Scott.
And you, like I, can't wait to get back to our guest, Bill Federer, Federer, AmericanMinute.com. I will, in the midst of my rush to get home and get ready for Thanksgiving, I will at least get this link on TamaraScott.com. We will get this link on TamaraScott.com so you can listen to this again. I am taking notes to the point where, gosh, if Ryan hadn't warned me, we would have missed that last break because the information is so good. And I'm going to go back and listen to the tape myself just to try and absorb all of the teaching that we're hearing. And it's fascinating, the intricate interweaving of where we've been in world history and the similarities to where we are today and why we are here. But we're going to get right back to Bill Federer with AmericanMinute.com. Bill, if our listeners wanted to hear this or read one of your books or your DVDs, the closest to this, is there one, or do we need another DVD from you?
Well, I have this mentioned in several different ones. One is the book America's God and Country Encyclopedia Quotations. Another is called American Minute, and they're short stories for every day of the year, and there's several on the Pilgrims and this history. And I also do a daily TV show called Faith in History that airs on the TCT network. That is on DirecTV, or they can watch it with a link on my website, AmericanMinute.com. Just go, the little link says Watch Faith in History.
Okay, so you can tune into AmericanMinute.com for that information, but I will get this link on TamaraScott.com because I know folks are going to want to come back and hear this just like I want to repeat it myself. All right, Bill, our next break is at 45 past the hour, and I'm just going to unleash you to go again.
Well, great. So we are looking at England, and there's a King Henry VIII, and he is a Catholic, but his wife is not able to have son, just a daughter. He decides to divorce her. The Pope won't recognize it, so he decides to be his own Pope, and he goes on to have 6 wives and wants to complete separating from Rome, so he comes up with an English Bible, and some people read it, want to purify the Church of England, and they're nicknamed the Puritans, and the king doesn't like them, and he arrests them and puts them in prison. There was one Puritan professor at Oxford. His name was Alexander Leighton, and he thought that the Anglican Church should have separated more from the Catholic Church. And his big issue was cassocks, the black robes that are worn, and he was arrested and had his nose cut in half, his ears cut off, branded on the face as a heretic, whipped twice, put in the Tower of London until he died. I mean, it was a really serious thing for... now, just interesting with the cassocks, the Oxford and Cambridge, those were schools to train clergy, and the clergy wore the cassocks, and so that's why the Anglican Church continues to wear those. But the universities in America were founded originally as religious institutions to train missionaries, Harvard and Yale and so forth. And so they would wear the cassocks, men of the cloth, right, the black-robed regiment, and we're familiar with this term. And over the years, they put out less clergy, and they just started putting out students. And so when the students would go through graduation, they would wear the black cassock, and so that caught on. So every high school in America on graduation day, they have the kids put on black cassocks. That goes all the way back to the priest seminary in Europe. And anyway, I thought that was interesting. But so anyway, here's Alexander Layton. He thought that they should no longer wear the cassocks, and the head of the Anglican Church was the king. He said, no, we're going to wear them, and he gets his nose cut in half. So it was serious in England. Now, another group said it's beyond hope of trying to purify the Church of England. We're going to separate ourselves. They met in secret barns, basements, and they eventually fled. A bunch of them sold their property, got on boats, and they were going to leave. And at the last minute, the captain robs them and turns them over to the police. They're thrown in jail. Another group of these pilgrim separatists sell their land. They arrange for a Dutch ship to pick them up on the coast of England, and the men row the supplies out, and they're stowing the supplies on the ship, and while they're stowing them, somebody snitched. The British come over the hill, capture the women and children waiting on the shore. And the Dutch captain sails off. He says, I'm not here to fight the British. We're just going to leave. So he leaves with the men. And you can just imagine the women and children on shore saying, husband, get back here. For 2 years, they passed those women from one court in England to another, one jail to another. Finally, a judge said, look, you didn't do anything wrong, just go home. They go, duh, we sold our homes. And so they put them on a ship, sent them over to Holland, and they finally find their way to their husbands. How do you like that? So there was a nice ending to that chapter. But fewer and fewer separatists came over because it was a tough life in Holland. I mean, they didn't speak the language. They had to work 3 jobs a day. And so they eventually settle in Leiden. While they're in Leiden, that is where they run into Jews. And sure enough, the Jews were chased out of Spain, chased out of Portugal. They went to the Dutch. And in Leiden, Holland, there was a rabbi teaching at the university, and he taught Hebrew, Aramaic, and Syriac. And we see that the Christian pilgrims began to identify with Israel. And in their writings, they would say, well, they left the Pharaoh and we're leaving the King of England, and they were persecuted and crossed the Red Sea. We were persecuted and we crossed the ocean. And they're going to the Promised Land. We're going to go to our Promised Land. And so we see over and over again in the Pilgrim and Puritan writing this identification with the Jews. William Bradford, governor of the Plymouth Colony, he writes in there how he longs to read the scriptures in the original Hebrew language. And anyway, so Holland, they had the 7 united Netherlands. They united against Spain, and they became prosperous. A little background. In Catholic Europe, there was a sin called usury, the paying or receiving of interest. And so there were no companies, no joint stock companies. And so there were guilds of merchants and traders, even monastic guilds that would make things and sell them. And sometimes they would get some money. But really, there were no companies. And so if you wanted to do an endeavor that cost a lot of money, like sail to the other side of the world, you needed some rich guy to underwrite it. And that's why, Columbus had to find the King of Spain or the nobleman. And so when the Reformation happened in Holland, that's when they started some of the first companies. And it was the Dutch East India Company. And for 2 centuries, it was the most prosperous company in the world, more than all their companies combined. And they sent ships to Indonesia to get spices. Now, anybody, a baker, a blacksmith, could invest money in the ship, and when it came back filled full of spice, they'd get paid a profit. They'd get, the interest on it. And if you wanted to sell your interest in this ship while it was at sea, you would go down to the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the very first stock exchange in the world. And it was limited liability, so if the ship sank, all you lost was your investment. You couldn't be held liable for lawsuits or whatever. And when the ships did sink, they invented something called insurance companies. That's right. The very first insurance companies were Dutch. And so, and now the Dutch with this became the most prosperous company in the world. They had Recife, South America. They had Amsterdam, New Amsterdam, which, became New York. They had Goa, India. They took from the Portuguese. South Africa. They controlled Jakarta and Indonesia and an island off the coast of Japan. And so they were wealthy. So the Jews celebrated in Holland, and sort of interesting that when they went there, God blessed Holland, and they became a global power. But the Pilgrims settled there in Leiden, Holland, and then after 12 years, the Pilgrims decided that they wanted to go to the New World. Spain was threatening to attack Holland, which they eventually did. And you know how the Dutch defeated them? They broke the levees. Most of Holland is below sea level, and they would build these rock walls, pump the water out. They always needed these windmills to pump the water over the wall and eventually pump it back into the ocean, and then they would reclaim the land and grow stuff. And but when the Spanish invaded, they broke these levees, and they flooded the Spanish armies. But before that happened, the Pilgrims decide they're going to flee. And they were going to go to Guyana, South America. That's right. William Bradford says they heard about the perpetual spring and how it's so wonderful, but then they reminded themselves of what the Spanish did to the French Protestants in Florida. Jacksonville, Florida used to be Fort Caroline. It was a French fort, French Protestant Huguenots, and the Spanish wiped them out.
We have 45 seconds for our next break.
Anyway, so the Pilgrims decided to go to the New World, and they were going to go to Jamestown, which was founded 14 years earlier. And so they were a company colony, but before that, they got blown off course. And so they came unexpectedly to Massachusetts, and they decided to write the Mayflower Compact. So this is their government. It was the first government document written in the New World, and it was unique because it was them granting themselves permission.
All right, we're going to go to break here. We'll be right back. The Mayflower Compact, I will have that link on tamarascott.com. You're hearing Bill Federer on Truth for Our Time, 99.3 FM and webcast1live.com.
Credit cards are like grandkids. They love you, sometimes get out of control, and it's fun to get a new one. Who can stop them from piling on?
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of Des Moines. At the end of the day, you can return the grandkids, but you're stuck paying off bad credit card debt. We'll help you put the fun back into using credit cards responsibly. Right, kids?
Yeah! If you need help getting credit cards off your back, call Consumer Credit of Des Moines.
Hi, my name is David Burrier, your Hope Coach. I host a live weekly talk show called I've Been There every Thursday afternoon at 5:30, right here on webcast1live.com, and on my weekly radio program Saturday mornings at 10 on Truth Network 99.3 FM. I interview common everyday people who have survived incredible life challenges and who testify to God's faithfulness in the midst of their storms. So join me as we bring a message of hope and encouragement. Everybody needs hope. I know, because I've been there.
Rockton Prevention is celebrating 25 years of creating a caring community. We want to say thank you to the tens of thousands of Rock High School mentors that have carried our message of health, love, and encouragement to over 1.5 million children, teachers, and parents. Our mentors teach children methods and skills to prevent bullying and drug use. Thank you to all the school administrators, teachers, and counselors for their opportunity to serve you. Rock on, fair citizens, rock on! This is Pat McManus for Rockton Prevention, the Richard O. Jacobson Foundation, and this station.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Welcome back to Truth for Our Time with your host, Tamara Scott.
Thank you for staying tuned. We're talking with Bill Federer, Federer, with the American Minute. You can find more information, DVDs, books on that website, but you can also listen to him and watch the television that he show that he does daily on that AmericanMinute.com. We'll also have this on Tamara Scott. I will get this link on there, even in the busyness of the holiday. I'll try and get it on there for you. And I know I want to go back and re-listen to it. We have maybe just 5 minutes left, Bill, and we haven't even gotten to the ISIS portion of Paris, so maybe you'll come back and join me. We can talk about this more because you're such an expert on Islam. But I want to come back. When we tell people that Islam, the Mayflower Compact, Thanksgiving are related, people seem surprised by that. And you've given us a great history up to this point in our quick time here ending the show. Bring us the Mayflower Compact for those who don't think we're a Christian nation, don't think, as you said, the negatives that they bring about Columbus. I want you just to take it back and bring us into where we are today, if you can, but bring us through that Mayflower Compact and our first Thanksgiving.
Sure. So I read through every charter of every colony, and not only is each one founded by a different Christian denomination, the king is in charge. The king decides who's going to be in charge. Well, when the Pilgrims were going to land in Jamestown, providentially they didn't, because that first 10 years, 500 died of Indian attacks, diseases, malaria, and starvation. But they were blown off course, and they landed in Massachusetts, and they didn't want to get off the boat and have every person a law unto themselves, and so they came up with their own form of government called the Mayflower Compact. It says right in there, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, a voyage to plant the first colony on the northern parts of Virginia. And they create their own government. It says, in the presence of God, we mutually covenant ourselves together to form a civil body politic and agree to render all due submission to the laws we pass. This was them granting themselves permission to do a government. It wasn't the king having some appointed person on the boat deciding what's going to happen. And now this Mayflower Compact became a blueprint for the other New England colonies, eventually for the U.S. Constitution, which starts off how we, the people, we're granting ourselves permission. And, of course, the word federal is Latin for covenant. We have a covenant form of government. Well, the Pilgrims get off the boat. Half of them died the first winter. They would not have survived had it not been for Squanto, this Indian who years earlier had been kidnapped, taken to Spain, sold into slavery, found his way to England, worked for years, found his way to Newfoundland, worked, and then finally dropped off the winter before the Pilgrims, only to find his entire tribe had died. And so plague had wiped him out. Now, had Squanto not been kidnapped and captured, he most likely would have died in that plague. William Bradford says a French ship was shipwrecked earlier 3 years, and the sailors got ashore. The Indians killed them, but one of them must have had a disease. The Indians caught. So in a sense, the Pilgrims landed on the one spot on the eastern seaboard that was uninhabited. Again, half of them died the first winter, but Squanto the next spring tells them how to plant corn and catch fish and trade with the Indians peacefully and catch beaver skins. It takes 40 years' worth of beaver skins to pay off their loan. Matter of fact, they saved up 800 pounds of beaver skins, and in 1625 they sent them back to England for trade. They needed lots of supplies, but William Bradford said a Turkish man of war, a Muslim pirate ship, captures the ship in the English Channel, takes it to Morocco, and sells the crew into slavery. And so they get to London, they have no supplies, and it says all trade was dead because of the ship taken by the Turks. And so he said what was meant to be happy tidings, they came back sad, because they said, hey, we don't got any supplies for the little Pilgrim colony. So even the Pilgrims had to suffer with Muslim terrorism and ISIS. And so they struggle along, and but they are able to be at peace with the neighboring Indians because of Squanto's interpreting, and they had a 50-year peace. And so the Indians show up the first Thanksgiving with their their deer and their turkey and the game, and then the Pilgrims have their puddings and so forth. And the first Thanksgiving goes on for 3 days. And but then we realize that in colonial times they had this attitude: when things were bad, you would have days of prayer. When things were real bad, you'd have days of fasting and prayer. And when things turned around, you would have days of Thanksgiving. And it was just sort of on an as-needed basis until some of the states and colonies decided to have annual days of fasting, usually Good Friday, annual days of prayer and Thanksgiving. And then the revolution starts. And when the Americans defeat and capture 6,000 British at the Battle of Saratoga, the picture of that is in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, the Continental Congress has the first national day of Thanksgiving after the Declaration. And it mentions Jesus Christ. Imagine that. And so it's November 11th, 1779, and it says that Day of Thanksgiving be throughout the states, and that the Lord would bless our arms, and that he would grant his church plentiful effusions of divine grace and pour out his Holy Spirit on all ministers of the gospel, and that spread the light of Christian knowledge throughout the remotest corners of the earth. Clearly, these are Christian references from a Christian people. When the British are defeated at Yorktown, the Continental Congress declares another day of Thanksgiving. When the Continental Congress declared a day of Thanksgiving, Jefferson is governor of Virginia, and so he orders Virginia to observe a day of Thanksgiving to Almighty God. And then, of course, Lincoln was the one who made the Day of Thanksgiving an annual event. Yes. And so every president from Lincoln had it be the last Thursday and the fourth Thursday in
November.
Now, no, it was FDR that wanted to move it back a week because he knew that the shopping started the day after. He thought it would kickstart the country's economy during the Depression. It didn't work, so he moved it back to the last one.
I kind of liked his idea just for decorating my home. It would make it a lot easier because I like my Christmas stuff to be up a little bit longer.
They called it Franksgiving, and some states celebrated, the Democrat states celebrated Franksgiving, and the Republican, some states celebrated the two. So for a couple of years, it was a big confusion what day Thanksgiving was.
So that's why it didn't work. He drew attention to himself other than the God that our pilgrims gave thanks to. So in 2 minutes or less, can you touch on ISIS and Paris?
Right. So the Muslims, from the beginning of Muhammad, wanted to set up their Islamic State, their ISIS. Muhammad was a religious leader, a political leader, and a military leader. Muhammad himself fought in 66 battles and raids and killed 3,000 people, cutting off the heads of 700 Jews in Medina. And since he's the best Muslim that ever lived, Muslims that want to be better Muslims want to be like him. And so Islam is a religion of peace, and they think when the whole world submits to the will of Allah and becomes Muslim, there will be peace. And so their goal is to make the whole world submit to Allah, because then there'll be peace. So it's a religion.
But that won't be true because the Muslims kill each other.
Well, they do. That's why it just keeps getting worse and worse. But so there's three springs in Islam of them trying to set up this Islamic State. The first was from 622 to 1071. That was Arab-Persian. The second is a Turkish spring that goes from 1071 to 1928 after the Ottoman Empire fell in World War I. The Ottoman Empire is disbanded. But finally in 1928 is when the Muslim Brotherhood started. They wanted to get back to conquering the world for Allah. And they have twofold. One is they've co-opted our U.S. military foreign policy, and they're wanting us to so our government has supplied the guns to ISIS. Most of Hillary's emails that she didn't want people to see, it's her transferring guns from Benghazi to Turkey to arm the Muslim Brotherhood to take out Assad in Syria. They want to get rid of all these kings so they can have their Islamic State.
Okay.
And,
so
and also
I have
sending them, the Syrian refugees coming to America. The thought is, are we being set up for an Arab Spring? Simultaneous Baltimores and Fergusons all across America building up to a head before the next election so the president can declare martial law.
Out of time. Bill Federer has been my guest. Bill Federer, AmericanMinute.com. I hope you'll take time to check him out. I will put it on TamaraScott.com's website. I hope you will take time out to read the Mayflower Compact, to give thanks, to read some scripture. Last scripture of John said if I were to record all that he has done, I could not possibly put it in one book. Take time out to give thanks to the Creator.